I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment. So can anyone tell me why there's a woman sitting on my couch watching TV? I was in my room getting work done when I had gotten a bit hungry and planned on walking to the kitchen to get some leftover Chinese food. My kitchen sits right next to the living room, and as soon as I walked into the dark hallway, I noticed the television was on. I know I never stopped to watch anything on it, so this was an immediate red flag. Thinking that maybe it was updating or maybe Alexa had switched it on by mistake, I walked over to turn it off, but my heart dropped when I saw a woman with oily black hair sitting on my couch watching it. Now, for a moment I was confused because I knew there was no one here when I walked in, and I knew all the doors and windows were locked. From the time I came home, I couldn't have heard anyone break in, so how the hell could a person be sitting there? After the confusion passed, I wanted to walk forward and ask what the hell she was doing in my house. But something screamed that would be a grave mistake. If anyone's ever experienced sleep paralysis, that's what the feeling was like. I told my body to move, but the primal part of my brain refused vehemently. I slowly crept back inside my room, and I just waited in silence. Now, at this point, I know you're already screaming at me to call the cops, and trust me, I wanted to. Nothing at that moment would have made me feel better than to have 1 or 2 armed police officers there to deal with her so that I didn't have to. But if I'm being honest, I didn't want her to hear me talking. If she'd walked into my room, I'd be trapped, and at that moment, I felt like that'd be a nightmare. After waiting for half an hour in silence, I mustered up enough courage to at least observe and see what she was doing. Forcing myself up, I cracked the door open just enough to get a clear view of the hallway and look at where she was sitting. If I didn't know any better, I'd have thought she'd legitimately just stumbled into the wrong house and was relaxing like any normal person. But something was off. It almost looked as if she was slumped forward on the couch. Part of me wanted to believe that she was sleeping. But what I saw shattered all hope of that. She reached a disgustingly long arm towards the door and unlocked it from her seated position with ease. I haven't measured yet, but eyeballing the distance from my couch to the door, it'd have to be at least 8 or 9 feet away on the low end. She slowly stood up and made a clumsy effort to walk towards it. Her body was horrifying. She was tall, uncomfortably so. If I had to guess, I'd say that she was maybe 9 feet with arms that touched the ground and dragged behind her. Her hands each roughly 11 fingers that had to each be around a foot in length. From what I remember, she was completely naked with sagging skin that hung loosely off her extremely thin body. She was also paler than I thought possible. Her skin appeared almost gray, and if I didn't know any better, I'd think that her skin belonged to that of someone recently deceased. She didn't move gracefully. She dragged her massive body towards the door and raised her long arm towards the doorknob to pull it open. It almost looked like she had to break her own bones to complete the movement. But as she pulled the door open and moved a spindly leg outside, she stopped. My blood ran cold as she slowly turned her head towards me, and I caught a glimpse of her face. I wanted to scream, and I didn't see any eyes. Just a puffy exterior with sagging eye holes and a mouth with long, rubbery lips that drooped past her shoulders in a permanent look of anguish. I didn't know if she saw me or if she even had the capability to. All I remember was her turning her head back outside and leaving my home. She shut the door behind her, and I was left in silence with my heart pumping faster than it ever did. I rushed outside with my phone to see if I could catch her on video, and I wish I hadn't. I wish I'd just closed the door and gone to sleep and gotten drunk and tried to pass the whole thing off as a messed up nightmare, but what I saw, I know it was real. I looked outside in the cold dark and I saw her hanging off the side of the building like a goddamn spider. The window of the person above me was open. She was fishing inside. A few seconds of searching, she pulled out their son. Her hand was completely wrapped around the head, and I couldn't tell if they were alive or dead by that point, and she slinked off into the darkness with a young boy. I caught it all on video. I must have watched the video 100 times before deleting it. I mean, what the fuck was I supposed to do with it? Do you think the police would have believed it was a real piece of evidence? Even if they did, what the hell could they do? And as a parent, are you better off thinking that your kid ran away? Or knowing that it was taken by an entity that you couldn't even begin to comprehend? At least with the former, you have hope that maybe you'll see them again. I couldn't bring myself to bring up such a crazy notion to a grieving family. Or worse, have them believe me and go looking for something that no one should ever try and find. I knew as long as I kept it, I'd be tempted to watch it, and every time I watched it, I'd be driven further into madness. Well, there have been more stories of kids missing as of late. I've even heard some rumors about pets going missing from people's homes. Surprisingly enough, I even heard a story about a full-grown man disappearing. He was never seen again, with absolutely no trace of where he went or why he left. The only thing suggesting any kind of outside force was an open window and a few strands of hair police couldn't match any DNA to. This has taken quite a toll on my life. I tried to find info on this thing, but as far as I know, there's nothing. If anyone out there has any similar experience, please tell your story. Share images of the thing if you have them. I just want to know that I'm not crazy. I'm quitting my job tomorrow. I'm staying with my brother on the other side of the country. There's no way I'm sticking around with that thing any more than I need to. I don't plan on being here much longer, but last night I heard a knocking at my door. So I know the next time I see it, I won't be telling a story afterward. But I also know I'm burning this whole damn apartment down with me. Unicorns are real, and if you know where to look, you too can see them, just like I did. Now I'll tell you exactly where to find them. I know that saying that probably torpedoes the credibility of what I'm about to say, but you have to understand that there's a very good reason why I'm keeping this information to myself. I'm sure that if you're clever, then you'll figure it out on your own. Or at least, you might be inclined to try. Please don't. The unicorns are real, and they are not to be disturbed. I'd known Marissa ever since I was a young boy. So we'd grown up together in The Hague. She could be difficult. She was very particular about what foods she would eat, where she would sleep, what products she would buy, and she could be a demanding lover, but still, she had my heart. She knew that she was beautiful, and she did everything she could to keep that beauty. In the winter, we spent much of our time in the gym. I'll admit, I went primarily to admire her. She had a lovely body with shapely legs, firm abs, and the face of a model. If she'd wanted to, she could have made quite a bit of money off her beauty, but she had no interest in that. I didn't complain. In all her radiance, she was mine, and mine alone. In the summer months, our rigorous routine in the gym moved outside. We both enjoyed the outdoors far more than we enjoyed the gym. We'd hiked most trails in our area to the point where they'd become boring. Marissa came from a well-off family, and her father was happy to fund her excursions around Europe and Scandinavia. There was so much of the world to see, and Marissa wanted to see every inch of it. She wanted to dine in the most luxurious restaurants, to stand atop the great works of nature, and to conquer everything that there was to conquer. It was because of that when she heard about the unicorn forest in the Ukraine, she could not resist it. Our friend Stefan ran the same circles as myself and Marissa, although he was a bit older than her. He too had a thirst for knowledge and exploration. I suppose he chalked himself up with names like Byron, Marco Polo, and Darwin as great figures in history, although in truth I doubt most people would have known his name. I'll admit, I never quite liked Stefan. His stories always seemed too large for life, and yet Marissa clung to every word he said. We'd met up with him for lunch when he told us of the Fey Forest in Ukraine, where unicorns roam freely like they did in the old days. I truly thought that he lost his mind completely. Yet I could see Marissa's eyes widening. I knew she was entranced. Unicorns? She'd repeat. In Ukraine? You're serious? Absolutely, Stefan said. We had a glimpse up there. He showed us where to go. The area is quite remote, but I could find it again. You wouldn't believe your eyes, Marissa. They're more beautiful than you could possibly imagine. Her eyes darted over to me. I don't think my disbelief really actually registered with her. Could you get us a map? Where did you see them? What did they look like? The excitement in her voice was cute, I won't lie, but I still disapproved of it. Stefan just smiled like nothing was wrong as he took out his phone. It's a bit north of Kyiv, near the border where the Ukraine meets Russia. Belarus. He zoomed in closer to it. The forest he showed was closer to Belarus than to Russia, and on the map it looked unremarkable. It's a few days' hike. It's a round trip. But you will see them, I promise you, Stefan said. Marissa looked over to me, grinning wide from ear to ear. We have to go, Peter. We have to. Her mind was made up, but mine wasn't. I glanced over at Stefan, unsmiling. This all sounds a bit too fantastical. Even for you, I said. You said you saw them yourself. Did you get any proof? Not as much as I would have liked, Stefan confessed. A few pictures, not the quality I would have liked. He opened the photo app on his phone to show us what he meant. I could see shapes amongst trees that resembled horses. As I scrolled through them, I only saw a few clear shots where I could see any horns. The pictures weren't the worst quality I had ever seen, but they didn't wow me. If Stefan was competent, he could have photoshopped them in an hour. I passed his photo back to him. That's part of why I'm meeting you here today, he admitted. I need to get back out there. I need to see them again. You two are good hikers. You can help me get in there with decent equipment to photograph them. We could show others that they're real. Imagine it. Proving the existence of unicorns. This all sounded like some child's fantasy to me, but I could hear the palpable excitement in Marissa's voice as she spoke. Peter, come on. Even if it's not real, it's a new trail. There's nothing to lose, is there? I suppose she was right. We'd hiked trails for a few days before, just for the fun of it. This wouldn't be that much different. And I knew I couldn't say no to her. Marissa was used to getting what she wanted, and her reaction when she didn't could be difficult to cope with. This was not a fight that I wanted to have with her. All right, I finally said. I suppose there's no harm in going. I didn't expect we'd see any unicorns, but if this would make Marissa happy, it was worth it. Perfect. Yes, thank you. I promise you won't be disappointed, Stefan said, ignorant of the fact that I could never not be disappointed in him. We departed for the Ukraine within the next few weeks. Stefan and Marissa had handled most of the travel arrangements. It was a couple of days' drive to the Ukraine from The Hague, but we made good time. Stefan took over the driving as we'd stopped for a night in Kyiv. I sat in the back of the car listening as he shared overblown stories of his adventures with Marissa and waited for the ride to end. He'd been in the middle of recounting his famous luncheon with Madonna when we pulled onto a dirt road. The car rocked and shook as we continued up it. I looked out the window, seeing nothing but heavy trees on either side of us. The forest around us seemed strangely dark and lonesome. Something about it felt unwelcoming. You almost there? I asked. Close, Stefan replied. There's a clearing up ahead where we park. After that, we'll need to proceed on foot. I'll go over our route before then. There's a few landmarks we can use to get around. Oh, this is so exciting, Marissa chimed. She looked back at me, grinning wide from ear to ear. It was the most lovely smile I'd ever seen. Sure enough, Stefan had told the truth. There was a clearing up ahead where we parked the car, and afterwards we discussed our planned route, where we would head up north toward the large river. It would be about a day's hike. We'd follow the river upstream for about a day. Supposedly the unicorns live near the river. That's where we'd like to see them. After that, we head southeast, down a gradual incline that would take us close to the clearing. From then, we should have been able to find the car again. All in all, it was intended to be a 3-day hike. Marissa and I had gone through far more extreme conditions, and if his tales were to be believed, so had Stefan. It seemed easy enough. When we finished our final checks, we gathered our supplies and set off into the woods. It was late morning, and the day loomed ahead of us. I couldn't shake the feeling the surrounding woods gave me, but I did try and convince myself that this really would be a good hike. It was nearing dusk when we reached the river. The water ran wild, and the noises of it were soothing. Our day had been uneventful, but not unpleasant. As much as Stefan's ceaseless chatter annoyed me, I knew how to tune him out, like white noise. I stood on the riverbank, looking at the flowing water that shimmered orange in the dying sunlight. I could feel Marissa coming up beside me, her light blonde hair rustling gently in the wind. Her eyes were bright and drank in the sights before her as if it was all for her. It's beautiful, isn't it? I asked. Breathtaking, she replied. Should we get a picture? She didn't need to ask twice. I took my phone out of my pocket. We snapped a selfie with our back to the river, basked in the golden dusk. Still have it. I still remember Marissa's lovely smile. With the picture taken, she leaned in to kiss me on the cheek. Thank you for agreeing to come, she said softly. Well, even if we don't see any unicorns. It was worth it to see this, I replied. She playfully swatted me on the shoulder. We will! Stefan never lied to us yet, has he? I was pretty sure he had, but I kept that to myself. The next morning we set out early. As planned, we followed the river upstream. There was a bit of an incline, but I wouldn't call it a hill or a mountain, just raised in landscape. The forest around us seemed far too quiet, quieter than it had been the day before for sure. The birds didn't chirp. I heard no small animals in the brush. Even Stefan was oddly quiet, although I wouldn't have complained about that. The only sound was that of the rushing water by our side. We walked for a few hours in silence, scanning the far side of the river. I saw nothing there save for more trees. It was Marissa who saw them first. Peter, she whispered. Her voice was sharp and drew me out of my own thoughts. I hadn't noticed that Stefan had suddenly gotten low to the ground and Marissa was bidding me to do the same. I got low and I peered out at the river. I didn't see anything out of place at first. The camera, Marissa said. Get the camera. Stefan was fumbling with a large camera that he brought with him. It was a more high-tech device, no doubt meant to capture more legitimate pictures of these creatures, but I still couldn't see anything. There! Marissa pointed at something on the far side of the river. And then I saw it. It was almost invisible amongst the trees. Its fur had a mossy texture to it, but once I saw its outline, I'd recognized it for what it was. The unicorn was taller than a normal horse. In fact, I'd say it was easily twice the size. Its fur was shaggy, which helped it hide amongst the trees. A tuft of mossy fur hung off its chin like a goat's beard, but the most prevalent feature of it was the single spiraled horn in the center of its head. That horn must have been as long as my arm. The unicorn seemed oblivious to our presence, and it wasn't long before I saw others joining it. The others weren't quite as large. I assumed a few of them were juveniles. I watched some of the larger ones move to the edge of the river before bending down to drink. Stefan's camera clicked. The unicorn looked up before dismissing the sound as nothing. You're beautiful, Marissa whispered. Peter, do you see? Do you see? I saw. And I was speechless. Stefan had been right. They were far more beautiful than I could describe. There was a surreal grace to them, like swans or peacocks. They seemed almost regal in this place. There was no sound save for the water and the occasional huffs they gave off. I watched as the largest unicorn even submerged itself within the river and began to cross. Stefan snapped another picture of it as it got closer to us, but I watched the unicorn carefully. Should we be moving? I asked. Are they docile or? My guide last time said not to disturb them, Stefan whispered. They aren't used to encountering people. I heard they spook easily. Part of why I couldn't get good pictures last time. The unicorn climbed up onto our riverbank and shook itself off. It looked back at the others of its group before entering our side of the woods. I saw a few more unicorns entering the water as well. Stefan snapped a few pictures of them before beginning to stand. "Where the hell are you going?" I asked. "I'm going to try and find the big one, get a better vantage point." "You said don't disturb them." "I'm not disturbing them. I just want to get more pictures." Then, just like that, Stefan was off and Marissa was following him. She glanced back at me, a gleam of excitement in her eyes before she vanished into the trees. I swore under my breath and I went to follow her. I found Stefan a few feet away, crouched behind a log with his camera perched on top of it. The largest unicorn was just barely visible ahead of us. It stood guard as the others of its herd just joined it. There were a few others of its size that came first, followed by some juveniles. Stefan snapped his pictures, lining up each shot carefully before we took the photograph. As the camera clicked, I saw the largest unicorn look off in our direction. It seemed confused by the sudden sound. A juvenile had looked over as well, and I watched as it made its way closer to the log to investigate. "Look, look, look!" Marissa tapped Stefan on the shoulder to gesture to the oncoming baby unicorn. Stefan pointed his head out from behind the log, then aimed the camera at it. The unicorn continued its curious approach before stopping a few feet shy of the log. It flinched when Stefan snapped another picture, but didn't run. It just looked down at him as if trying to decide what to make of him. Marissa looked up in quiet awe. The unicorn was close enough to touch, and I saw her reaching out to do exactly that. "Marissa," I warned. "Be careful." She didn't respond. She just kept reaching out to it. The unicorn recoiled slightly, then sniffed at her hand. It tried to pull back, and she just had to touch it. Her hand brushed up against its neck. More of a tap, really. The unicorn trotted off just as she made contact, and Marissa looked back at me, eyes wide and wearing that smile I adored. I wasn't smiling back at her, though. "Marissa, move!" Her smile faded, only briefly, before she realized just what I'd seen. She must have felt the ground shaking as the largest unicorn broke into a sudden charge. We'd crossed a line and the unicorns were not happy. Marissa got clear of the log almost instantly. Stefan, however, did not. He tried to hastily scramble to his feet, his camera slipping out of his hands, and he bent down quickly to snatch it up. If I had time, I would have shouted for him to leave it. There was no time, though. It happened so fast. In mere seconds, the unicorn was at the log. Its head was bowed, and that ivory horn was pointed right at Stefan. He looked back at it the instant before it skewered him. The horn went through his neck, and I watched as the unicorn lifted him off the ground. It shook him violently, dashing his quivering limbs against the nearby trees. Tattered skin and broken muscles stretched, then snapped as Stefan's corpse fell free from the unicorn, but most of his head remained impaled on its horn. "Run!" I said. Marissa remained frozen in place. I seized her by the hand. "Run!" We took off at a sprint back the way we'd come. I could feel the ground quaking beneath us as the unicorn gave chase. Marissa's hand slipped from mine as she kept her pace with me. I could hear her frantically breathing. I could almost sense the fear radiating off of her, and I could hear the thundering hoofbeats of the unicorn. We couldn't outrun it. I could tell that it was gaining on us. We had mere minutes at best. My mind fired on all pistons, trying to think of a way out. And that's when I remembered the river. It was right there at our side. We could dive in and let the current carry us away. It wasn't a foolproof plan. It had more than its own share of dangers, but I liked our odds of survival in the river a lot more than I liked it against the unicorn. "Here," I said, and reached out to grab Marissa's hand again. I tugged her towards me, but as I did, I felt her fall. I heard the snap of something in her leg as she hit the ground and nearly took me down with her. She cried out in pain, her hand gripped mine tightly. Behind us, I could see the unicorn advancing. It would be on us at any moment. Tears streamed down Marissa's face. She was terrified. And so was I, but I knew I didn't have time to drag her to the river. With one pull, I ripped my hand from her grasp. "Peter!" she cried. She tried to stand. She tried to follow as I ran to the river. "Peter! Marissa's voice died in her throat, and I made the mistake of looking back as I reached the edge of the river. I saw her atop the head of the unicorn, its blood-covered horn protruding through her chest. I saw her eyes wide with mortal terror. I saw her mouth open in a silent scream of pain. Flecks of blood dotted the area around her mouth. The horn had gone completely through her. Her back was pressed against the head of the unicorn, and I saw it hoist her up, her limbs folding back against its skull. The unicorn's eyes fixed on me, and finally, Finally, I threw myself into the river. The rushing water dashed me against the rocks and fallen branches. It took me far away from my beautiful dead Marissa and towards salvation. I managed to pull myself to shore a few miles downstream, not far from a major road. I was battered, bruised, broken, and almost certainly half mad, but I was alive. My body was able to heal in time. I told the world that I fell into the river trying to rescue Stefan and Marissa. That's not the truth. No, I never could have saved Stefan. But maybe I could have saved Marissa. Maybe. There's no going back now. And what's done is done, and all I can do is give my warning. Do not fuck with unicorns. You will not survive. I saw my first drive-by shooting when I was just 6. This kid, a grade above me, Timmy Markel, used to walk me and my brothers home from school. Mama couldn't afford to drive us to the elementary, and well, the bus didn't go anywhere near our place, so Tommy would take us every day. We had to pass through some rough neighborhoods, and Mama always told us to listen to everything that Tommy said to stay safe. The day it happened, my middle brother, Byron, was running ahead, and going down an alleyway that we normally avoid. Tommy was right at his heels, shouting and admonishing him. And then it all went to hell. Sounded like the crack of lightning split through the air, collided with Tommy, sent him flying backwards. I remember seeing blood spattering out of his left eye, hearing the sound of his skull as it hit the pavement, and then watching as the car drove off. And all because he wore the wrong colors to school that day. Mama promised us that she would find someone else to get us to school, but like so many other things, it became empty words. I don't blame her, not even now. Raising 3 kids in the Bronx was hard. Rent alone ate most of her check for her first job, and little she made as a waitress covered our food and utilities. And sometimes we didn't even get one of those. We learned to survive, though. The only way we knew how. Since our days were spent at home rather than in classrooms without adult supervision, Byron, Trey, and I would get into a lot of trouble. It's not that we went looking for it, but the apartment was stuffy, claustrophobic, really. Staying there alone when Mama had to work felt like we were just, suffocating. I knew she wouldn't have approved of us sneaking out just to toss rocks at passing cars. But oftentimes the reason for our visits to the neighborhood were for any other reason entirely. Hunger. I can't really explain to you what that feels like. To be so hungry that a loaf of bread tossed aside can be appetizing. This is what my childhood memories amount to, scrounging through trash and trying to find anything to help Mama. Most of the days we didn't even see her. Not even when we came home to sleep. I made it my responsibility as the oldest to try and make our visits to the street far and few between. But it's hard to say no to a crying 7-year-old. I wasn't ashamed to search for food in the dumpster. I actually thought that was necessary for our survival. It was during one such afternoon that our lives changed forever. We had gone about 6 blocks from our house picking up littered Coke cans that we planned to recycle for spare change when Trey decided to run towards a nearby dumpster and take a peek inside. It had become so ordinary for us to do this, and me and Byron didn't even scold him for doing so. A few seconds later, he was leaning over the edge of the dumpster. Our youngest brother let out a surprised yelp that made Byron and I come running. He stumbled off the cardboard box he had been standing on and started fumbling over his words. There's There's a man in there, he said with a shaky voice. The two of us gave him a skeptical glance, and Byron went to investigate. Jesus, what happened to this dude? He asked. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stole a glance as well. The image of that man stuffed amid the garbage is something that I'll never erase. He was naked from the neck down, his head completely severed, and his body covered in sores and cuts, like his skin started to decompose. From the middle of his chest, it looked like someone had taken a butcher knife and cut him straight down, then used sewing thread to sloppily put him back together again. What is that? Byron asked, pointing to where his junk was supposed to be. It looked like someone had stuffed his body full of small duffel bags, and when his body had defecated for the final time, they had caused his organs to rupture out. It could be drugs, I suggested, realizing that the style of this killing resembled similar gang incidents we had seen in the neighborhood. Cool, Byron said, stumbling into the dumpster to fish out the bags. I wanted to scold him, scream that he could get an infection or something far worse. But it all happened so quickly that he was back out before I could say a single word. Eagerly, my brother ripped open the bag, and all of us found our jaws dropping as we saw stacks of $100 bills stowed inside. What the fuck? Trey said, trying to contain his excitement. We need to get him out of there. He could be loaded, Byron said. And suddenly this was starting to feel like a very bad idea. I looked around the alleyway, curiously wondering if maybe whoever had done this to the headless stranger, he was still lurking about. Hurry up, I told him, not bothering to even express my concern. Byron curiously lifted up the lifeless corpse like it was some kind of rag doll, and Trey grabbed the legs, doing his best not to puke as fresh maggots ate away at the man's thigh and legs. I helped him up over the edge of the dumpster, letting out a grunt as the dead weight hit me, and we all stumbled onto the street below. The body tumbled over the side of the grimy metal and flopped to the ground, sprawled out with more bodily fluid spilling out as it smacked against the concrete. I helped to get him over the edge of the dumpster, letting out a grunt as the dead weight hit me, and we all stumbled onto the street below. The body tumbled over the side of the grimy metal and flopped to the ground, sprawled out with more bodily fluid spilling out as he smacked against the concrete. Oh, this is disgusting, Trey said, holding a hand over his mouth. Quit your whining, Quaid. Did you bring your pocket knife? Byron asked me. I fumbled with it, passing it through my middle brother as he climbed on top of the body and started to cut away at the flimsy threads that held the corpse together. Almost immediately, the body split apart, spilling out more wads of cash and jewels that had replaced vital organs. Holy shit, Byron said as his fingers sunk into the treasure trove excitedly. Trey, get your backpack. Come on, before someone sees, he told me. I grabbed mine too, and all three of us hastily snatched up as much of the loot as we could. I can't carry any more, Trey whined as he struggled to zip up the pack. There's gotta be a few more pounds here, Byron said as he looked around the alley and started to drag the body behind the dumpster. We can come back for the rest, he decided. I didn't think that was a good idea, but I didn't argue with him. We ran home as quickly as we could without looking suspicious. It was probably strange seeing us carry those backpacks full of cash and jewels. Especially because they weighed us down, but we did our best to look normal. Inside our damp apartment, Byron was the first to show Mama. Look! We found enough to get us back into school, he exclaimed. As the treasure spilled out in front of our parents, I saw her face show a mix of emotions. Surprise, shock, fear, maybe a few more. Baby, this is amazing. Where did you get this? She asked. We didn't tell her, and Byron made up a lie about doing a bunch of jobs for neighbors. Mama was in too much shock to ask further. She was trying her best not to cry. We all agreed we would go back to the dumpster later that evening when Mama went to work again. Once the coast was clear, I led the way. I wasn't thinking about anything else except getting those jewels. We found the dumpster easily enough. But the body was nowhere in sight. Shit! Somebody must have found him, Trey said. Maybe they stuffed him back in the dumpster, Byron suggested as he struggled to flip the lid open. From the street behind us, we heard the familiar sound of a trash truck, and I told him to hurry up. Byron was sticking his head into the dark trash bin, muttering that he couldn't see anything when suddenly he lost his footing and the boxes he was standing on fell away. The lid slammed on his neck and caught him hanging against the dumpster as my brother screamed and Trey and I ran to help him. The trash truck started to make a familiar noise, the long metallic arm of the vehicle extending to take hold of the edges of the dumpster. It was so dark the driver couldn't see that Byron was trapped. And suddenly the truck lifted my brother and the bin up in the air over the top of the visor, causing Byron to fall into the wide container at the back. Trey ran to the side to try to shout at the driver as the loud noises of the gears and metal started to whine, and I ran to the back to see if I could catch sight of Byron. I watched in mortified horror as he struggled to push himself out of the trash. The container started the routine process of smashing the bags into compact sizes to give room for more debris, and before I could even scream, my brother was caught in the compactor. His own voice echoed around the entire city as he fell back and was smashed by the powerful loader. I heard his bones crack and shatter as his scream was covered over by the sound of the dump truck shutting. Trey managed to get the driver's attention, but it was too little too late. Holy fucking Christ, the driver said as he saw what happened to Byron. The fuck is wrong with you kids? Why were you out here in the first place? He shouted, his own words trembling as he realized how horrendous the accident he had just caused was. I'm calling the police, he muttered. Trey and I panicked. We ran even as the driver whipped out his phone. I don't think we stopped until we made it back to the apartment. When we finally got a chance to catch our breaths, both of us were too tired to even mourn our brother. And then we approached the steps of our flat and saw the door ajar and broken. Our hearts dropped even more. The nightmare, it wasn't over. Inside, we saw a trail of blood that told a story. A vicious assault that crossed every part of our small home. Then we found Mama in the bedroom. She was beaten to a pulp, riddled with cut marks that resembled us of the corpse that we'd found, and had deep wounds that made her bleed out all over her mangled body. Around her were a few of the jewels that had been scattered during the scuffle, with the rest missing. The rest of the evening was a blur. Exhausted and numb, we both curled up next to Mama and we wished this was all a bad dream. When the morning came, so did the cops. Somehow the dumpster driver had managed to extract what was left of Byron and use that to find our address from his backpack. I never saw my brother again after that morning, both of us taken into foster care without the bat of an eye. I was adopted by a middle-class family and somehow managed to learn what it was like to live a normal life. And I walk my son to school now, down the same rough streets to try and hold my head up high and say that I made it out of that life. I think about Trey and Byron, and I wonder what would have happened had we never found that body. And then I see children my son's age wearing clothes that smell, scourging for food amid the garbage, and I know the answer. I give them warm food, or I help them to a shelter. Secretly, I know that the same nightmare I lived through, it's one of them, one day, to get them out too. Because as horrible and frightening as those memories are, no matter how often they keep me awake at night, they all pale in comparison to the desperation these children are filled with. Every single day. You won't hear about my town, not in the news or elsewhere. At least I thought it was a government conspiracy, but well, as time goes on, I realize now that that's not the case at all. whatever's down there, setting these things up, it's got us right where it wants us. I was ready to leave. So ready to put yet another town behind me and to forget it ever existed. It'd be just another link in a long chain of shitholes we've given up on. But it's all too late for that now. I can't remember where we are, or even what it's called. Sometimes memories come back to me, but they go away just as quickly. Now I'm resigned to just getting the story out there. I know I'm beyond help, but that doesn't mean that I have to disappear into nothingness, like all the others. It all started with a nightmare. I wonder if others had the same one. I'm not sure. I think they did. This wasn't a normal dream. It was like waking from a coma. In the dream, I saw a city fall from the sky. The buildings all wrong, with the things that lived in them even worse. I lived there, maybe before or after it fell, shuffling around in sunken alleyways and sewage-filled trenches, my mind snatching glimpses of thoughts and ideas. I had to hide from the masters. I had to hide from their gods. I was a dirty, filthy, groveling little man with no power. And they were chasing me relentlessly. A rogue slave. Just before they caught me, their dark presences close to snatching me, I opened my eyes to find myself desperate for breath, naked, coated in sweat, ankle deep in snow. My feet burning with pain, and when I looked at my frozen hands, I saw the tips of fingers, shredded and bloody. Behind me, the sun was rising, casting light into a bloodied hole dug in the snow. Had I dug that? I wondered. Had I been on my hands and knees, digging desperately? And now I was awake with a terrible fever setting in. My head aching, my skin on fire. I turned and I shuffled back towards my house, tears welling up in my eyes. It was like I was feeling someone else's emotions, thinking someone else's thoughts. I felt violated. I felt grief. My wife found me slumped against the back door of our little farmhouse, passed out. She screamed when she saw me. I wouldn't come to my senses for another week. And when I did, the sun was a mirage of light probing the slanted blinds of my bedroom. I looked outside to see the spring was underway. But around here, that just means the sun stays up a little longer to reflect off blinding snow. I had no idea what had happened. But for some reason, thinking about the ice, about digging into it, filled me with revulsion and fear. Felt like I'd been taken over, puppeteered around like some kind of doll. And after some time collecting myself, I shuffled downstairs, desperate for an answer. I found my wife at the breakfast table, looking worn and saddened. I asked her what had happened. She refused to reply directly, only breaking out into hysterics when I asked what she was holding in her hand. "How the hell were you out there?" she asked. Felt like I'd done something terribly wrong, like I'd betrayed her. But I didn't know how or why. I told her I didn't know what had happened. I reached out to touch her, and she pulled away. "And what were you doing with this?" she asked, her voice with despair. Looking in her hands, I saw it. A small scrap of blue fabric. My heart sank low into my chest. I was flooded with grief. "I thought you left all of her things behind," I asked. She didn't respond, eventually leaving me to walk away. For the next few days, I was forced to stay in bed and recover, but she never let go of that scrap. I spent most of my time trying to remember what had happened, but could only conjure up images of confusing anger, as if glimpsed through an opaque sheet of ice. I thought that maybe before I'd gone out digging, my wife and I had gotten into an argument. Something awful had happened not long ago. That much I was sure of. She'd even removed my things from our bedroom, putting them into boxes in the spare bedroom. I was left staring at those boxes as I recovered, sweaty and weary from disease, wondering why she'd done something so hurtful. Nothing about her seemed right. Certainly not the way she was around me. When I was finally strong enough to carry myself, I resolved to find out more. I waited until my wife was out on errands and layered up. My first steps outside were timid, my body cringing from the bright morning sun and brisk air. I pushed on, marching over lumpen fields until I found a small den that I'd carved out in the snow, visible even after all this time. I took my time looking around, noticing that I had somehow found a place where the deep permafrost came close to the surface. I reached out and cleared away some of the loose snow, revealing another piece of fabric buried in the crystalline ice. I brought some tools, and I quickly chipped it out. And I felt my heart fall to pieces at the familiar touch of that tiny fleece onesie. The ice was over 30 millennia old. I knew that. Everyone in the town knows it. But seeing that scrap of fabric nearly made me lose all perspective. For a while, I grabbed the nearest pick and started smashing at it over and over. I was desperate. Some lizard part of my brain was acting on wild, panicked animal instinct. "She's in there," I screamed. "You have to get her out." But I knew damn well she wasn't down there. Just touching that ice gave me the worst feeling in the world. I could feel something radiating out of those depths, something that had risen up. Before I left, I sniffed the fabric and smelled her once more, wondering just what the hell could have made such a thing possible. My wife didn't return for some time, and in the end I was forced to drive into town looking for her. Along the way, close to Jack Simmons' place, I noticed more bloodied holes dug into the earth. Closer to his house, I saw his teenage daughter out in the yard. She was fixated on the snow, digging into it with raw, broken hands. I did stop and call out to her, but she wouldn't listen. And I would have gone further, getting out to help her were it not for the sight of her father, emerging a few moments later with a harrowing look in his eyes. He was carrying ice picks, and he didn't look up at me once, not even when I screamed and I hollered as loud as I could. At one point I thought he glimpsed me, but the look in his eyes seemed terrified, like I was some kind of wretched intruder. Realizing he wouldn't speak to me, I moved and passed many similar scenes, all isolated people who were consumed by the need to dig. And when I finally reached town, I saw more of the townspeople gathered around the center, staring inwards towards a half-buried building jutting out of the icy earth. It was an odd thing, looking Palatine in places, colonial in others. It was almost entirely frozen, only a few small turrets and spires poking free from the ice, but there was enough of it to attract a crowd. "He's in there!" one woman screamed. "I can hear him still in there!" I coasted past the people slowly, taking in the strange hysteria that had run through the town. Shops were closed, cars were parked in the middle of the road. Some buildings had even collapsed as if from an earthquake, and in some parts men were digging tools to the town center, and I watched as a few young men erected scaffolding around the place, and an older man began ordering the townspeople around, telling them what to do, where to go. Pretty soon it became clear to me that they were planning to dig. I called out to an old friend who I spotted lingering near the back. "Craig!" I cried out. Quickly he turned his plump frame around. Momentary confusion across his face, quickly replaced with warmth and joy. He ran forward and he grabbed my arm through the open window like a child rushing towards gifts under a Christmas tree. "Ah, it's good to see you," he said. "I knew good things were coming, and seeing you here just proves it." "That's good," I said, a little apprehension from a manic twinkle in his eye. "But what's going on?" "We're digging," he said. "For what?" "Don't you see?" he asked. "It's right there. We just need to help it get out." "That house?" I asked, confused. "Where did it come from?" "Oh, I don't know that," he answered. "But it's our house. Don't you see it? I grew up in that house." "You grew up in Phoenix," I snapped. "Don't be daft." "I didn't say I knew how it got here," he growled back in anger. I'm just telling you what it is. It's our house. And we're gonna go back. People talking about finding other bits down below, coming up out of the ground on their land, under roads. Even under the school, it's all over the place. That doesn't make any sense, Craig, I said, feeling lost amongst his words. No, it doesn't need to, he said, growing more irate. That's where I grew up. It's where we all grew up. Every one of us. We're all in there. Don't you see? It's bringing it back. Everything we lost. I thought you of all people would know what's down there. I thought of the blue fleece. And before I could speak, Craig pointed to one of the collapsed shops with great enthusiasm. That's where Miss Pickers grew up. And over there, that's where Shelley was born. And down there. You keep going and you take a right and you'll find the Irish Catholic school where Deputy Sanders was raised. Craig pointed back to the building in the town center. And that's the center. That's where it's all coming from. So we're helping it out. So it can bring more to the surface. Craig, I began before trailing off. Already a whole story of scaffolding was up and around the back of the building. And I saw men, women, and children all grabbing pickaxes and begin pulling back the tarmac. The building was just an icy fortress where just the tip of its highest towers could be seen. I shivered at the sight of it, pulled my coat up around my neck. I spotted others doing the same, and despite the early May conditions, I watched as snow began to fall around the otherworldly spires. It felt wrong. The whole damn thing felt wrong. I drove out looking for my wife, and I saw more scenes of digging. People were organizing themselves into little pocket laborers. And I even found my wife carrying pickaxes to some young men. They were in the parking lot round back of the hardware store, a lot of them, standing around and staring at a door laid flat into the very ground itself. Amazing work, boys, she cried as she brought them their tools. You able to get it open yet? Not yet, one of them said with a polite smile. But we'll keep trying. I pulled up and called out to her, insisting on her attention, even when she tried to ignore me. She seemed nervous as she approached the car, as if she wasn't quite sure of me. I asked her home, and at first she protested, telling me, the whole town's working together on this, honey. We can't just leave them behind. We've all got to pull our weight if we want to bring it up. I mean, just look at this door. Who knows where it leads? But about that, I stopped and looked at the odd glimmer of madness in her eye. Kind I'd seen in my grandmother before her passing of dementia. I needed her home. I decided, no matter what. We've got our own spot to dig, I said, holding out the piece of blue fleece I'd kept. We should go home and focus on that. My wife's face grew pensive. She looked at the young men with concern, only for one of them to stand and come over to us both. Don't worry, miss, he said. You go home with your husband. We're all down here, bits of us, waiting to be found. I could feel it. You sure? She asked. Of course, he said with a smile. We all have a place down there. And with that, she finally climbed into my car. I got her home and convinced her that we'd need a full night's sleep before we began digging. But it didn't change much anyway. I woke up to an empty bed around 3 a.m. Looking outside, I saw the snow beginning to pile up. Hell, it looked like a damn blizzard. But at least it made her tracks easy to follow. They went right to the spot where I'd woken up weeks ago. She was there, on her knees, blanket wrapped around her. She was sobbing, a racked, confused anger, happy sob. I knelt down beside her and went to put my arms around her, but stopped. She was holding something that had emerged from the ice like a splinter pushed out of skin. The sight of it turned my stomach, and I fell over with rank despair. I felt like I was stepping further and further into a nightmare. I could have maybe explained the strange building as a ruin, or at least something built by the town who I figured had gone completely mad, but this was something else. She was holding a hand sticking out of the ice. Chubby little newborn fingers clasped around her thumb. For a brief moment, I thought I lost my mind, only for it to suddenly snap back into place. I tried to get her inside, but there was no chance of her leaving. I had to light a fire and try to keep her warm in this little icy den any way I could. And after a while, the cold grew too much for me, and despairing, I left to go back inside. I found her the following morning, collapsed on the kitchen floor. I managed to drag her upstairs, where I was left to care for her over the following days, during which time the town spiraled further into lunacy. I made only one more daytime trip to get some supplies, and there I found the belligerent horde of angry idiots who'd torn half the town apart to make room for whatever was coming. For every building pulled down, at least another 2 had grown out of the ground to replace them. They were haphazard things, listing skyscrapers that tilted over the landscape, casting enormous shadows, plantation homes in the southern style, dingy flats from dreary London, crumbling shanties, beautiful manors, mundane suburbia clashing with imperial history. It was all there, like a kaleidoscope of architecture that was slowly consuming the town. Some people I saw guarded their little bits of madness joyously, screaming about it being theirs and theirs alone, no one else's, sitting ominously with rifles in hand while they waited for the earth to make free their doorways. Other people bickered over repaying favors, saying one such person helped dig for another and so it was owed back to them in due. Some people cried with joy, others despair. More than a few corpses were frozen stiff in the middle of the street, and the weather had turned bitterly hostile. Quite a few people had just crawled up into a ball on the ground and never woken up. And others were still standing, hands and arms frozen to the tools half buried in the earth. Before I left, I found myself coming to a complete stop in my car, without ever realizing why. Something had caught my eye, the sight of it making my limbs weak. It was a strange, listing doorway, abandoned and empty, lodged halfway in a street close to the edge of town. The lonely porch it bore had been driven up straight out of the ground like a breaching whale. I stared dumbfounded at the rotten timber doused with snow, a sight I'd never thought I'd see. I recognized that door, and for a moment, I felt the temptation to leave my car and to investigate. When I noticed an eerie glow emerge from a half-buried window beside the door, one that I knew led to the very kitchen where my mother had spent years cooking for the family, I froze out of an uncanny nostalgia. It was a light. And perhaps a torch, maybe even a flame. I pondered this, feeling a distant terror advance upon me like a tiger in the jungle, and when I suddenly smelled the strong odor of pipe smoke and saw a strange face appear in the frosted window, gaping and strange like a mask, suddenly that terror was upon me, and I stamped my foot down on the accelerator as hard as I could, and I left that damn place behind me. If I could have, I would have never returned, but my wife was still unwell, and we needed food and medicine, and I was forced to return twice more, but those times I let nightfall offer me some protection. It was a smart decision because the corpses were growing in number, and the few living people I glimpsed were dark and hostile. Those that weren't digging were looking for people who could be dragged into it. One night I followed one of these men quietly, climbing onto the roof of a still-standing store so that I could spy on the town center from afar. It was like something out of the Stone Age. That strange building was now dozens of stories high with strange arches, buttresses, terraces, walkways sticking out of it on all kinds of strange angles. All around stood at about a dozen wiry men, many of them who I recognized, whipping their townsfolks into hauling earth. Barely a few hundred people remained out of the thousands who'd once lived here, and while plenty could be found dead, I could not help but wonder where the rest had gone. I was given some kind of answer when one worker managed to drag enough soil away to reveal a new door. He cried out about his discovery, and the crowd clamored around him, anxious and joyful. Close to the back, an older man pushed his way forward and fell to his knees before the door. He stayed there, sobbing, before a slave driver came over and gently pulled him to his feet. He whispered quiet words into the old man's ear, and they both embraced each other, laughing and crying. And the old man cried out some words, but they were lost in the blizzard, and then I saw him open the door and enter. It slammed shut behind him with the finality of a guillotine. For a few brief moments, the crowd remained where they were, milling about before one of the slave drivers began screaming for work to continue once more. "We all have our own doors," I heard him roar. "We have to work to find them. Work to find yours. Help your friends so they might help you." Just as quickly, they resumed their frenzy, and it was as if nothing had ever happened. The second time I returned at night, I found the town center even emptier than before, but there were still enough shadowy figures wandering the blizzard to give me concern. I decided to stay closer to the edge of town where I gathered supplies from rundown stores. At one point, as I huddled below the smashed windows of a ransacked pharmacy, wind and snow pouring into the open shop, burying the shelves and goods beneath the sloping elements, I was momentarily forced to wait, breath held for a stranger to pass me by. But instead, they slipped and fell, angled over the broken window, and slid into the very spot where I hid. They began to wail in fear at the sight of me. Now, I'd never seen this person before, but they wore ill-fitting clothes. Something in their eyes made me think of idiocy. They didn't look right, and I reached out to hush them as best I could. "There you are," I heard from above. The voice was rich with warmth. Looking up, I'd recognize the warming smile of Dr. Alistair, an older woman who'd worked in the clinic for years. Confused, I greeted her, and I let her help me up, but found myself growing weary as she explained herself. "This here's my twin brother," she said, and I couldn't stop myself looking at the man askew, since he was clearly no older than 19. "It's been decades since I've seen him," she added, taking my hand in hers and staring into my eye, perhaps looking for a sympathy she'd found elsewhere. "Oh yes, he was my closest friend for a long time. I thought I'd lost him. Now come in," she said. "Let's let our good friend go back to finding his own home down below." I watched as she dragged her brother up and propped him under the arm. Strangely, his mouth opened and let out a kind of wail. It wasn't a normal cry. It felt helpless and dumb. "Oh, I know," Dr. Alistair cooed. "We'll go back as soon as we can. I just got a few people you ought to meet first." After that, I stayed away from the town center entirely, taking my chances with the houses dotted around the countryside. Down by Mr. Simmons, a whole street had grown out of the very soil, and occasionally you could glimpse him wandering from building to building, crying out for his daughter. "Your ma ain't coming back," he'd sometimes cry. Other times he's screaming things like, "Give her back! Give her back, Mari! She ain't yours no more, you passed on!" I felt sorry for him, but I still ransacked his home as he wandered in the blizzard, stumbling from shop to shop in a street that just a few days before hadn't even existed. I remember looking out his bedroom window and noticing how the strange palace in the town center was so tall it could be seen from miles away. It filled me with unspeakable dread, and for a moment I was glad I'd managed to avoid the mass hysteria. But then again, I hadn't really avoided it at all. There's still no easy way to explain what exactly happened to my wife. At first she was unwell from her stay in the cold. And then one day I went in and I found her nursing. The sight alone was enough to bring me to tears, and I'm still not sure I'm able to say these things aloud and to stay sane. I just know that afterwards, after she got her daughter back from the den, she stopped acknowledging me. I was on my own, except I still had to get food for her and our daughter. At least I think it was my daughter. She never let me get close enough to see. I understood why, of course. Because what happened way back was all my fault. But still, it hurt to be alone. I'd say there's maybe 100 people left now, and that makes me wonder if it's safe to go back to town, but lately I've been having nightmares about the smell of pipe smoke from my childhood. Out in our yard, I can see the strange shape of a new house rising from the den. Started with a fence, but quickly turned into more until soon a roof began uprooting trees, and now there's a whole floor, and looking in through the window reveals dusty abandoned halls and bedrooms. It doesn't take much to recognize our first marital home, or the baby's bedroom, complete with a crib. She left as the door was free from the ice. This whole place, it's like a 1,000 memories from 1,000 people that become real and are all struggling to find the room to overlap. I wonder if that's what the big, strange palace in the center of the town is. Maybe that's where all the memories reach out from, and I have no doubt it's the source of it all. And that most of it's down below the ground and not above it. Sometimes I dream about it, though. It looks different to what it is now, but it's still the same because in the dreams I somehow know it's the same house. Only in my dreams it's a city. And it's falling from the sky. Ever since she left, I wanted to leave. But I can't remember how to. There's no horizon anymore, just a haze. The blizzard's been joined by a thick fog that makes it harder and harder to see, and I haven't seen my wife for a whole night now. I think she's moved into the house out back. And I wish I could have gotten through to my wife. I wish I wasn't alone. Doesn't she know that nothing down there is real? People don't come back from the dead. Even if it looks that way. I nearly went down into the ice recently, if only by accident. I was looking for supplies, and I was so dazed that when I broke into a house, I didn't realize it wasn't a normal house, but it was one of those ones that had come up out of the ground. I was looking for a basement where supplies might be kept, but around about the fourth set of steps down, I realized something wasn't right. Carpet gave way to ice-slick stone, and furniture lay half grown up from the dirt, and it dawned on me that this wasn't a typical house. Looking around, I saw photos of a family with a teenage son, a geeky-looking kid with thick glasses, bore a slight resemblance to a farmer I knew lived nearby. I couldn't say for sure. Still looking down into the darkness, I felt a strange terror. Close to panic, I managed to steady myself and shine the torch down below where I saw a single severed head. The fingertips were bloody, the skin pallid and bruised, and a set of broken manacles were clamped around the shredded wrist. Blood that had pooled below the hand carried down into the darkness, crimson handprints streaked against the ice, their long, strange trails disappearing into the shadow. Something told me that these steps went on forever and ever, and when I heard the faintest shuffle as it suggests footsteps coming up to greet me, I was overcome with fear and I fled, taking whatever I'd grabbed with me. There were only two things in my hands at the time, the telescope and a few batteries that later turned out to be dead. The telescope, at least, had been helpful. Sometimes people come back, but not for long. And I could use it to spy them from a distance. And most of them I don't even recognize, but I saw Samson wandering around out there just the other day. I called out to him, and he burst into hysterics at the sound of my voice. When I finally got over to him, I saw he was a brittle, aged version of the man that I knew. His back had been lacerated, whipped to shreds, his teeth had been pulled, his fingers bloody and raw, his feet black and blue, leaking pus out of the snow. He was gaunt. A vision of death come to life like something out of a history book. I managed to drag him indoors where I tried to help him get better. "I don't want to go back," he said later that night. "I had a life once. It was better before we went down." "Don't go," I told him. But he just shook his head. "I could no more leave them than one of my cattle could leave my farm," he sobbed. "You know that better than most." And though the response made no sense, it terrified me nonetheless. It spoke to me the way my dreams had, making me scared of memories that weren't even my own. It was like I had become awoken to a species-wide hopelessness, the kind I always thought humans didn't actually know, but which I now suspect lingered in our primitive history. Did we once belong to something below the ice? Are we as feeble and as helpless to it as cattle are to us? And what if it wakes up? Simpson disappeared later that night. Not even a whisper to alert me, but I saw it coming. He didn't have a choice, none of us do. That's clear to me now, if only because of what he pulled out of a nearby closet. I don't know why he did it, but it was a small mercy. I could see they picked out good hems for my service. All that time, and she never threw away my stuff. Reading that pamphlet has helped me understand myself a little better, putting order to the chaos of my mind. I know now why it doesn't bother me if I go with the others or not, and why I felt such terror at the thought of following them. I already know what's down there, even if I can't remember. Like a cow that's glimpsed the inside of a slaughterhouse, I can't grasp the context or nature of my torture, but I know enough to stay away. It's like purgatory out here. I wonder if the storm will ever lift. And when it does, I hope somebody finds me. If only to prove that I'm real. I had to walk so far to get enough signal to post this. Will they cover up the disappearance, I wonder? Whatever's down there is old. It owns us, whether we remember it or not. It can reach into our heads, it can change our deepest desires, rewrite the world to convince us of lies. It can even bring back the dead. And don't be surprised if this is the only record you ever hear of my town. Pretty soon no one will be left. Except for me. Sitting here, reading my own funeral service. Over and over and over. The sleeping mind fascinates me. Namely, the nighttime hallucinations we call dreams. Because of this, I keep a journal to record every thought that passes through my brain at night. I set at least one alarm each day so that I'm able to wake up during my REM cycles and recall my grandest dreams. Sometimes I fall back asleep, but for the most part I keep up with it. It's been an enlightening experience, and so far I've filled a dozen notebooks with my nightly adventures. In addition to cataloging my dreams, I study the phenomenon. I've dissected every sleep guide at my disposal and watched countless documentaries. I've even took an elective back in high school called Nocturnal Fantasies, though it only lasted one semester. Not enough students to share my affinity for the topic. In other words, most of my waking life is consumed by sleep, in one form or another. Craving more knowledge on the subject, I recently pursued my town library's massive local authors section. I was hoping to find a book on dreams I hadn't read, as this was the one part of the library I had yet to set foot in. It was a long shot, but one I was willing to take in the name of research. After fishing through a plethora of self-published romance novels, I happened across one non-fiction title that caught my eye. Sleep Tactics. Exercises for a Mind at Rest. Written by Jack Grovewood. The blurb on the back was vague and reminiscent of a sleep help book with quotes like, "Learn the secrets to a good night's rest," and "Feed your mind's insatiable appetite for better understanding." Not a book on dreams, per se, but it did pique my interest. Delving into the book at home, I found it to be more up my alley than I previously expected. It was filled with chapters pertaining to lucid dreaming, meditation, and even sleepwalking. I was already familiar with most of the content, but it turned out to be an enjoyable read. It wasn't until the last chapter, though, that I was caught completely off guard. I will outline most of it below. Chapter 16. How to Exit Your Body. Disclaimer: this is not an OBE or out-of-body experience. As stated in Chapter 8, Out of Body, Out of Bed, I do believe in OBEs, but I find that they're just another form of dreaming. What I'm about to divulge to you is something completely different. It's neither an OBE nor any other dream state. This is a way to truly exit your body, using sleep paralysis as the catalyst. Before I discuss the specifics, I'd like to go over a few prerequisites. To pull this off, you must be proficient at lucid dreaming. Now, what I mean by this is that you need to have lucid dreams regularly and retain lucidity for long periods of time in these dreams. It also helps if you're able to manipulate your dream environment with ease. If you only lucid dream on occasion, you'll have to train your mind to do so more often. See Chapter 6, Becoming a Lucid Lucy. If you, however, are unable to lucid dream, then this technique is not for you. It's nothing personal. You simply lack the tools needed for departure. Another requirement is sleep paralysis. Now, most of us have experienced this at one time or another, but it will help immensely if you experience it on a regular basis. Coupled with lucidity and a focused mind, sleep paralysis is the only way out of your own skin, so to speak. That's all you need to know in the way of mental capabilities, more or less. It's an added bonus if you had an OBE, or Wake-Initiated Lucid Dream. See Chapter 7, Wake Unto Sleep. Now on to the fun part. I'm going to lay this out in a step-by-step fashion, followed by a more detailed explanation of what to expect upon achieving your first departure. Keep in mind that results may vary. Step 1. Fall asleep, on your back, in a slanted position. It could be on a recliner or a car seat, but your body must be diagonal relative to ground level. That's the only way I've ever been able to get this to work. For one reason or another, gravity plays a role. Step 2. Attain sleep paralysis. This is more of a waiting game than a step, as it's not entirely possible to execute at will. When it does happen, lucidity is key. You must be aware that you're in a state of sleep paralysis and be unafraid of your lack of mobility. This is one of the ways being a lucid dreamer comes in handy. Step 3. Once paralyzed, attempt to move your legs. If you're in the proper position, at least one of them should be mobile. If you can't move either leg, then you'll have to restart and experiment by tilting your seat in different positions. Step 4. Upon freeing one or more of your legs, attempt to free your arms. They will feel incredibly stiff and you shouldn't be able to move them, try as you might. You should then feel a sharp sting in your head. Don't be alarmed. You're not having an aneurysm. This is completely normal and is necessary to make your exit. Step 5. As difficult and strenuous as it may be, keep trying to free your arms. And as you do this, attempt to move the rest of your body as well. Put everything you have into fighting the paralysis, just don't fall back asleep. Step 6. As you wrestle with your mind and body, the stinging sensation in your brain is going to grow. It won't be painful, but it will cause you great discomfort. Let it happen. As the sensation builds, you'll start to feel yourself drifting away from your body. Don't fight it. Your mind is like a rubber band, and will want to bounce back from where it's been stretched. Don't let it. Follow the flow of departure. If you steal your mind's focus and follow these instructions to a T, you will have successfully exited your earthly meat sack and unlocked a marvel of the mind that has only just begun to be understood. And that's the gist of it. The author went on to say that the world you find yourself in upon departure will harbor some differences to the one you started in. It will appear similar in almost every way, but will be completely void of any life forms. On top of that, nothing will budge. Everything will remain in its place as still as can be. After revealing the delicate process of re-entering one's body, the author ended the chapter with the eerie warning, whatever you do, don't go near the water. I was dumbfounded. The entire book up to that point was factual, but that last chapter seemed like something out of a science fiction novel. It certainly made for good entertainment, but I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Why have such an out-of-place pseudoscience chapter in an otherwise reputable book? It just didn't make any sense. About a week passed before I thought about the book again. It was almost time to return to the library, so I decided to reread its final chapter. As absurd as it seemed, I teetered between laughing it off once and for all and actually giving it a shot. See, I didn't meet all the requirements, and it could amuse me to some extent. I could at the very least say that I tried it for myself, if for no other reason than to prove what a load of crap it was. After weighing the pros and cons, I ended up giving in to my curiosity. I knew it wasn't going to work, but it would be a fun little experiment, if nothing else. Besides, was there really anything better for me to do during an episode of sleep paralysis? The only minor nuance was that I'd have to sleep in one of my recliners instead of in the comfort of my king-size Serta mattress. Small price to pay for the sake of scientific discovery, I suppose. On the night in question, I wound up having 3 episodes of sleep paralysis. During the first, I was far too groggy. I completely forgot about the book and quickly fell back asleep. The second one lasted a bit longer, and I was able to remember the steps outlined in the first chapter. I could barely move one of my legs, and upon trying my arms, I did feel a small but noticeable discomfort in my head. I wondered for a split second if the author was onto something, and that made me a bit excited. Because of this, I jolted awake. Reflecting on the incident, I became intrigued. I still didn't believe that I could exit my body, but I knew something was going on. I decided to tilt the recliner back a bit and try again. This time, I would have better control. Next episode came pretty quickly. I hadn't fallen asleep yet, but my body was getting ready to. This is it, I thought. I allowed the paralysis to fully set in before attempting anything. It was difficult not to fall asleep, but I managed. And this time around, I was able to gain full control over my left leg. I moved it back and forth a few times before trying to free my arms. True to the method, they wouldn't budge and felt oddly stiff, more so than usual. This is when the familiar sting set in. It jarred me, but I kept going. The more I tried to move my arms, the greater the sting grew. Believe it or not, as I continued, I did, in fact, feel myself drifting away from my body. I tried to keep it up, but my nerves got the best of me. I lost all control for just a moment and was sucked right back into my body, immediately waking up in the process. The experience startled the hell out of me. It was beginning to seem more and more like the last chapter of Jack Grovewood's book was somehow accurate. My curiosity became aroused to such an extent that I felt the overwhelming need to tell somebody about it. Luckily, I knew just the person. My buddy Josh is a character. He believes in a lot of what I don't. This causes us to butt heads in a lot of topics. In simple terms, I'm a skeptic, and he is a believer. One thing we can't argue on, however, is our love for dreams. He's the only person I can talk to at length about the subject. He also happens to meet the requirements listed in the book. I was hoping he would join me for a sleep session and help me get to the bottom of what was going on. I called Josh up, I told him everything. He was ecstatic, as I knew he would be, and agreed to meet me at my place the following night for departure. In his mind, this is going to go off without a hitch. I wasn't completely sold on it yet. I was just happy to have someone else to tag along for the ride. Fast forward to the following night. We hung out for a bit. I showed Josh the book, his eyes grew wide upon reading the final chapter, and he couldn't wait to try it out for himself. I told him not to get his hopes up, but it was clear to me that they already were. Ready as ever, we laid down on opposite ends of the living room on my 2 recliners. Josh cracked a joke about how this was the first night we'd be sleeping together. I threw a pillow at him. And then we were off. Shut-eye was just around the corner. This was when things took a turn for the bizarre. I didn't have an episode of sleep paralysis right away, but I did end up waking a few hours into my nap. I noticed that Josh was fast asleep in the recliner across the room. Needing to empty my bladder, I walked past him to get to the bathroom, tripping over his leg in the process. I met the floor with a thud and turned around to see if Josh had woken. To my surprise, he hadn't. I knew he was a heavy sleeper, but even he should have woken up, given the commotion. Becoming worried, I called out his name. No reaction. I tried shaking him. Nothing. I grabbed a wrist and checked his pulse. It was there, however weak. And this was when I panicked. I ran to my room, I grabbed my phone, I scrambled to hit a call button, and just as I was about to dial 911, I heard a loud gasp from the next room. Like a diver coming up for air, I ran out there as fast as I could, and to my delight, Josh was awake. He looked at me with wide eyes and said, "Dude, it fucking worked." I was flabbergasted. Though Josh was an over-enthusiastic believer and downright stubborn at times, he was no liar. I asked him more than once if he was sure that it hadn't been a dream, and he insisted he was absolutely certain. Between his firm conviction and weak pulse just moments before, I had no choice but to believe him. It seemed that the book was legitimate after all. We spent the next couple of hours talking about it. After leaving his body, Josh found himself in my living room, but it was noticeably inanimate. Everything was perfectly still. Not even a speck of dust floating through the air. Josh also noticed that his body was translucent, a milky white outline of its former shape. He attempted to open the door to my house, but the knob wouldn't turn and the door would not budge. It took him a while to realize this, but he found that his new form allowed him to phase through walls. Josh went on to tell me that the world outside was very different from ours. He said it was like having the contrast dialed up on a picture. That and the static nature of everything made it feel like being trapped in a photograph. I tried to imagine it, but I knew I needed to see it for myself. We had plans to go back to sleep and enter the world together. Despite my excitement, I was able to make my first successful departure that night. Josh was waiting in the room for me, next to his sleeping body. Seeing ourselves like that was fantastic in and of itself, but I wanted more than anything to see the world outside. A world where adventure and discovery awaited us. For a few weeks, Josh slept over at my house and we explored the new world. It was fun and downright addicting. Curiosity was what was keeping us going. We wanted to know more and more about the odd realm we discovered. Here are just a few things we learned through our excursions. The lighting is fixed. Always looks to be about noontime, though there's no sun in the sky. It's impossible to phase through older buildings, not sure why. There's no life forms, just as the book stated, not even animals or insects. Sound is reverberated. There's always a slight echo when Josh and I talk. It's possible to fall asleep there, but you don't dream. If you travel too far from your body, you'll hit an invisible wall and be unable to go any further. And time doesn't pass in the real world while you're departed. After a month of successful departures, things changed. The more we explored, the more uncomfortable I felt. It always feels like something was watching us, even though there was no one around. Josh was the opposite. Our late-night adventure was becoming so routine for him that he was becoming bored. He kept talking about water and how he wanted to get a closer look at the pond near the main road. I reminded Josh of the author's warning, but it didn't seem to faze him. Eventually, his curiosity got the best of him. One night, upon leaving my body, Josh was nowhere to be found. I thought that maybe he hadn't departed yet, but up to that point, he had always beat me to the punch. This could only mean one thing. I faced through the wall of our home and raced to the nearby pond. Josh was there, standing at the edge of the dock that locals used for fishing in the real world. I yelled out to him, "Josh, what are you doing? It's fine, see? There's nothing to be afraid of, it's just water." I watched as Josh reached down and touched the surface of the pond. It rippled. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The water should not have reacted. We've been here for weeks. We hadn't seen a single thing move. Even the air is still. Perplexed, I began walking out towards Josh. He lifted up his hand, just as awestruck as I was. He pulled his arm back. The ripple expanded. With it, a small portion of the water turned dark, and after a few moments, something reached out from the blackness. It was a hand. A fucking hand. It reached up and grabbed Josh's leg, yanking him downward. He went feet first into the water, holding onto the dock for dear life. As he screamed, I ran towards him, and before I could even get halfway to his position, I watched him disappear into the water. I ran the rest of the way, but the darkness had faded and returned to normal. My best friend was gone. In a state of fear-induced panic, I ran away. I wanted to save Josh, but I didn't know how. Plus I felt that if I re-entered my body, perhaps I'd find him awake in the real world. It was wishful thinking, but it was all I had. That wishful thinking fell flat when I awoke. Josh was still unconscious. I tried and tried, but I couldn't wake him. And eventually, I called 911. He was taken away on a stretcher. The doctors say he's in a coma, but can't discern what caused it. And that's everything. See, I'm a fucking wreck over what happened. I tried visiting Josh in the hospital, but I couldn't find his parents. And they're always there. Instead, I go out to the pond in the real world, hoping that somehow I'll find answers. And all I do find are more questions. They keep me up at night, along with a recurring nightmare, replaying the event from that day. I've tried departing since, but no avail. Something's holding me back. It might be fear. That world is like a photograph. A still frame from a place that we were never meant to see. A moment frozen in time with a layer of reality stripped away, and something is living there. Despite this truth, I feel a need to dive back in and save my friend. He didn't heed the author's warning, but I'm the reason he entered the world in the first place. I'm the reason he can't wake up. I have to go back. Hey there kids, it's me, Mr. Creepypasta, and I wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching or listening to tonight's video or podcast. If you're interested in getting more horror stories, you can always check out the links in the description down below over to Amazon. Amazon will bring you over to a couple of different things. The Creepypasta Collections Volume 1 and 2 have some of the best authors that I've ever worked with in my entire 9 years of doing creepypastas online, as well as a link to the Creepypasta comic book and a couple of the audiobooks that I've worked on. If you like hearing my voice and want to hear more of it, you can always check over audible.com for Mr. Creepypasta and find Tales from the Gas Station, Volume 1, Volume 2, and many, many others that I have worked on in the past. They're a lot of fun. I think every story I've ever worked on with these guys have always been fantastic, so it's worth your time clicking. And a very special thank you to everybody on that Patreon, patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, especially Ariel Torres, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Ken Lando Higuchi, Brianna Van Tine-Janzen, Chompski, TheRedOakShieldVirus, Sindee Barney, Asia, G. Weevil 3, Diana Kraus, Stephen VanHuss, Tristain Pelton, Nico, TheGingerBroz, Dante Rowe, Raphael Rodriguez, Don Meulmeester, Eliminator 86, SteampunkSinner, Kaleb Dougal, Sky Harbor, The Homeless Bird 93, Gabrielle Undefined, Bobby Carmen, Liam Newman, Aaron Stormcrow, Bobby Jean Torgan, Dr. Strawberry, The Wormhole, Barbara Macedo, and Vic. Thank you guys so much, and if anyone would like to join them on that list, head over to patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. Here's hoping that you guys are loving the horror as much as I am. And sweet dreams.